All right. Hello, hello. Thank you all so much for being with me today. My name is Dr. Shukura Umi. I am a full-time faculty in the public health department, and I am currently working as the online coordinator. My research entails maternal mortality rates, more specifically, the title. You see, I'm over here throwing up. No, I am not doing good. Exploring the ways that maternal mortality is influenced and amplified by racial and class status inequities among women of African descent. Thank you so much for being with me today, and I'm really excited to share my research with you. For sake of time, I actually use several theories as well as a paradigm and an analysis, and I am not going to have time to go over the detail of each of those. I'll just give you some key takeaways, and you all have the slides and you can see them, so you can take it upon yourself to review that more. In the event that you are actually interested in getting a copy of my slides, I'd be more than happy to send you a formatted PDF version. And I do have a contact slide with my email address as the last concluding slide, and I'll be happy to share that with you once we get to the end. So first and foremost, the critical culture theory just basically is important because it pulls from how power dynamics and distribution of power needs to be considered when we're thinking about health outcomes. I especially wanted to use this because it focuses much on the class status. And I do agree not only with my own hypothesis and research questions, but also with the literature review that class status greatly contributes to the type of care and respect that a person receives when they are seeking medical treatment. Symbolic convergence theory contributes to identifying the ideas of how we as individuals connect our social similarities with one another's realities. Critical narrative analysis was actually influenced by the narrative paradigm by Fisher, and Sonia Pseudo-Manning actually revamped it and amended it later in 2014 and considered it to be the critical narrative analysis, which studies how humans connect or relate and reason with one another by sharing stories. All right, so my research questions, I wanted to know what are the personal communication experiences that African descent women, regardless of what stage they're at, if it's prenatal, if it's labor and delivery, if it's antenatal, what's happening within their trusted communities and what are they talking about? What are those communication experiences like? I also wanted to know what are their lived experiences as it relates to their patient and provider communication exchanges, again, regardless of which stage, so prenatal, labor and delivery, or antenatal. And then last but not least, what were the personal communication experiences of African descent women, specifically to birth interventions that can reduce maternal mortality? I was very curious about that as well. So I did do a two-phase operational study. Operationally, meaning I was trying to take abstract ideas and making them something that I could measure. And so I did a phase one where I operationally offered focus groups and was successful with recruitment. And then I operationally offered interviews and was successful with recruitment as well. And the study was IRB approved from the University of Memphis. Okay, so in addition to what you see on the slide, I did use purposive sampling because I knew who I wanted to talk to and I knew how to find them. And a lot of that credit goes to the breastfeeding sisters that are receiving support. Shout out to B-Stars. Again, that organization is breastfeeding sisters that are receiving support. I am humbled to be one of their board members, and they are based out of Memphis, Tennessee. Longtime organization, going on, I believe, 11 years old this year. They were huge and instrumental in creating a space for me to be able to host and recruit my actual data methods so that I could execute said interviews and the focus groups. Of course, I had a specific criteria of racial and ethnic background people that I was looking for. I needed people to have internet access if they chose to participate in phase two, which was completely online interviews. I needed them to have transportation access if they chose to participate in phase one for the focus groups where I would need them to come in person. I also just want to say that I am intentional about keeping this video very short, so under 20 minutes. But again, I have a contact slide at the very end with my email addresses. So please feel free to take that information down if you have more questions or if you want to talk more about this study. And again, I thank you for your attention so far. All right, so the study criteria, if you will, I had a sample size of 16 people. This was a qualitative study. And one thing that I want to point out is what was interesting to me was in my recruitment flyer, I did say that if you were striving to become pregnant, you could still participate in the study. You didn't have to already have given birth or labored a child. But surprisingly, all of my participants, 100%, identified as being parents and had already given birth. It was also interesting to note that because I did two phases, there was no guarantee that people who participated in one phase would participate in another phase. And in actuality, they did. There were two participants in actuality who chose to not only participate in a focus group, but they also participated in an interview, which was really cool. And then, of course, I had gift cards. The study was self-funded, but I did have gift cards. And so if they did participate in both phases, then they earned two gift cards. Wanted to respect their time and also was trying to be mindful of the long-term their historic trauma, exploitation, and just abuse and disregard of research and medical ethics when it comes to African descent populations. I should also mention that for my study, I am choosing to use the term African descent because I'm aware of colonization and the psychological, mental, and ideological harm that it has done to my ancestors. So if you paid attention when I showed you my recruitment slide, if you'll notice, I had a long list of the different colonial terms based on how participants might identify. So they might have been Black, they might have been African American, they might have been Black American, they might have been Afro-Cuban, they might have been Afro-Latina. Like there's so many terms, right? Because unfortunately, my ancestors with the transatlantic slave trade have been dispersed all around the world. And so I think part of that, in terms of me trying to reach the right people, is you have to be careful what your language and verbiage looks like. If I were to just say Black, then for my comrades who were born on the continent of Africa, they may not identify as Black. They may identify as Jamaican or Haitian. And because of that, they may not feel like this study involves them, and it very much does. By the same token, if I had just said African, then people who do identify as Black or people who identify as Haitian or Cuban may not have felt like this study applies to them. And as I just said, maternal mortality is actually a global issue. It is starting to increase rates on the African continent as well as all around the world. And what we're finding is the rates in the United States are worse compared to other areas, but it's not to say that they don't exist elsewhere. So this is a global phenomenon problem. And if by the time my 18 minutes is up and you have been persuaded to take this on as a research passion, then I feel like I have done my job because this really is going to require more of us to actually buy in and care about it. Even if it doesn't apply us directly, we still should give some thought and some empathy and figure out a way to contribute to this. All people who labor children deserve to meet their kids and have a great life with them. No one deserves to labor a child and then die before getting a chance to become a parent. Okay. All right. So I use the interpretive phenomenological analysis. This was adapted by Smith et al. In 2009, and there are actually 7 steps to it. I'm going to walk you through the first 2 steps first, and then I'll move on to steps 3 through 7. So because I chose to use IPA, one of the first steps is free coding. And this is basically where you're reading and rereading and you're becoming intimate with the transcript. Then in the next step, this is the initial coding. And this is where things start to get really interesting and why I really enjoyed using IPA. So I assigned free codes to parts of the transcripts, and they had to fall under one of 3 categories. They could either be descriptive, meaning there was something that described something that was relevant or wholehearted in a way. They needed to be linguistic, where they focused on how language was being manipulated or representative, or they needed to be conceptual, and that there was a way that they were giving some overarching idea or umbrella term to something that was profound and that I could take away from that analysis of that transcript. So you can see on the screen I have examples here where here is the initial code name. That was from step 1. And then what I did was I tried to categorize it based off of the 3 that you just heard me say, whether it was descriptive, conceptual, or linguistic. And so then here is the example of the actual exemplar from the transcript and how I tried to classify it based off of what I thought it would fall under. Again, descriptive meaning that it focused on the accounts of the lived experience, linguistic meaning there were specific words, phrases, or patterns, and of course, conceptual, meaning that there was a broad theme or idea that emerged from the participants' lived experiences. Moving right along, steps 3 through 7 were more of the same. So step 3 is where I actually started to go about where I was trying to identify the meaning in the text and I was looking for the emerging themes. Step 4, I was searching for connections, trying to identify commonalities and grouping the codes together. This is actually the completion of analyzing the text in terms of IPA because under step 5, this is where you move on to the next case. So after you have done steps 1 through 4 for the first transcript, now it's step 5, you can rinse and repeat and do steps 1 through 4 with the next transcript or however many transcripts you have. I should have mentioned this earlier, but I did 5 interviews and 3 focus groups, so I had 8 transcripts to do this with, and I did use IPA for both interviews and focus groups. Okay, for step 6, I looked for patterns across the transcripts and tried to connect narrative sources and emergent codes. And then step 7 is all about the reflection. This is where you're searching for connections and the meaning so that you can find a way to cluster and create more of an interpretive think back or review back, if you will, of everything that you have in front of you. Okay, so my themes, takeaways, results for phase 1, I have policies, obstetrics and gynecological American birth procedures, practices, classism and insurance, synthetic task, not joyous birthing, relying on self or trusted folks, desire for patient-centered communication. For phase 2, I have dehumanizing effects of capitalism and profit on patients. Number 2, assessing one's value. Number 3, desire for trust with provider. Number 4, assumptions about hospital births. Number 5, communication deficits. And number 6, advocacy. Don't have time to go over all of these, but what I can do is pull out some of the overarching themes in this slide and especially give you my interpretation as it connects to my research questions. Okay, so bringing it back to those research questions. So just to remind you, research question number 1, what are the personal communication experiences of African descent women regarding prenatal labor and antenatal threats in their trusted communities? And I would say some of my answers connected with some of the themes that we pulled. So first, conversations around maternal mortality were more likely to happen as it related to an alternative birth option. A lot of my participants realized that they needed to look elsewhere beyond hospital births, and that allowed them to get more advocacy. It allowed them to get more affirmation. And more importantly, they started to develop more of their patient rights and what their expectations were of what their next pregnancy and birthing process would look like. Participants spoke about how they needed to figure out how to talk about maternal mortality without inducing fear. So some of my participants identified as providers, and they were trying to think delicately of how to have that conversation with people that they considered to be clients or whatnot. And then finally, peer support and monitoring one another during pregnancy, what it means to speak out, what it means to have a secondary person there who is familiar with what's to happen and can kind of help look out for you. Unfortunately, I had a participant who had just given birth. Their partner was not there yet, and they identified a social worker provider coming in the room and basically trying to poach their baby from them and trying to get them to put their baby up for adoption. She did say that that was not the first time she had heard of something like that happening, but it was the first time that it happened to her. And that was incredibly disturbing to hear. So having more presence of advocacy and having more presence of protection, right, in terms of things like that. Research question number 2, what are the lived experiences with providers and patient communication exchanges surrounding prenatal labor and antenatal threats? Insurance type, that's a big one. I think we all know that, but just in case you don't know, the type of insurance you have determines the treatment that you receive. I had a participant who identified as having public insurance, which unfortunately based on the data is considered to equal less and worse treatment. And because she had public insurance, she noted it immediately in terms of the nurse practitioner saying at the front desk, we don't accept TennCare, we don't accept TennCare. TennCare being the public insurance type in Tennessee, which is where my study took place. And that was before my participant could even say 2 words. So the nurse was just saying when they heard the door open, we don't accept TennCare, we don't accept TennCare, when she didn't even know what kind of insurance she had. So that was just very interesting to me. And of course, if you have private insurance, then data also suggests that you're more likely to receive better care, have more advanced technology available to you, and more importantly, have more knowledgeable and more doctors who are available, providers, I should say, who are available to help you and answer your questions. Birthing as a business was a big one. Western practices are designated to prepare and push the patient for having a C-section, even if the plan is a vaginal birth or even if a C-section is not necessary. If you think about it, when you are in the process of labor and you're waiting for your dilation to become more open so your cervix can open up, they ask you not to eat any food. They ask you to come into the hospital hungry. And you have to think about it. If you're pushing a baby out because you are planning to do a vaginal birth, how are you going to push the baby out if you don't have energy and food to fuel you to do that, right? But this is all part of the design because ultimately they want to get you rushed through that because they don't really want you to do the vaginal birth. Instead, it's more profitable. This is why capitalism was one of my themes. It's more profitable for you to actually do a cesarean section. And this is why they ask you not to eat, because if you're doing a surgery, they don't want to have any issues with regurgitation or choking or fatal outcomes. Um, I have so much to say on that. So I hope that you will contact me so that we could talk more about it because that is disturbing and disgusting beyond measure. Not to mention, we've lost sight of what the patient needs because we're so busy trying to, code for a higher profit, right? Okay. And then last but not least, advocacy for thyself. I talked about having another person present. The participants spoke very highly about having a birth worker there, somebody who can respect the birth plans and the birth desires and not be dismissive about that. They especially talked about wanting to have a doula. And in one case, they even talked about what it meant to prioritize and to listen to their needs, especially because one participant really wanted to have a VBAC or what is known as a vaginal birth after cesarean. And she was dismissed, dismissed, dismissed until she finally found the right provider who said, I will try my best to meet your needs. That's what it's going to take. Number three, the last research question, what are the personal communication experiences of African descent women specific to birth interventions and the reduction of maternal mortality? Being not communicated with. I had participants who talked about how things were being done to their children, whether their child was in the NICU or not, that they did not give consent to. More importantly, no one asked them and said, hey, do you mind if I give your child this formula? Or do you mind if I take your child from the NICU to do something else? And it wasn't until the parent had to come and say, what are you doing to my child? They're supposed to be exclusively breastfed, or why are you doing that to my son? That's not what we discussed. So failing to ask consent was a really big one. Bad interventions versus good interventions leading to maternal mortality. That was a big one among my participants because they had to first discuss how birth interventions, excuse me, could be defined by them. They needed some time to kind of discuss, is it considered good? Is it considered bad? What makes it good? What makes it bad? And they started thinking about epidurals. They started thinking about having a doula. They started thinking about getting your water broken. Like that is a intervention within itself. The question is, does it fall under good or bad? And so those were some of the conversations that came up. Also, the idea of a one participant having better experience being on all fours and what that meant in terms of being dismissed. So I think that those are some really important things as I close out. I just want to say that this presentation is dedicated to Henrietta Lacks on the far left side, to Betsy, Lucy, and Anarcha, three enslaved African women who were brutally researched on, exploited on, not with consent by James Marion Sims. And I think when we think about how obstetrics and gynecology medicine has come to be, we don't give credit to our ancestors, and we should, because it's because of them that we can even think about obstetrics and gynecology because they were violated so many times. So we owe them everything and we thank them. In public health, we always talk about how education is so important, but this is Dr. Shalon Irving, and she died 24 days after her baby was born. She had a PhD, she had an MD, and she worked at the Center for Disease Control in the maternal and mortality division, excuse me, maternal and child health division. So when we think about education, that didn't cut it because she obviously was very educated. We think about health benefits, that didn't cut it. She worked for the federal government. They have good benefits. And more importantly, she had money. She was in a good class status, but yet she still passed away because she was dismissed 2 days before she died by the provider telling her, and I quote, there's nothing wrong with you. You need to go home. So these are things to think about. The same thing with Kira Johnson, had just given birth cesarean and was dismissed and bled out 8 hours when that could have been prevented and her life could have been saved. I dedicate this presentation to all of these women on this slide. We owe them everything, and we have a responsibility to make sure that their legacy continues so we can say their name and give credit to them. Henrietta Lacks is the reason that we have antibiotics, among many other things in this world. We owe them everything. And the first thing we can do is stop dismissing people because we think that they are not valid or important enough. Next, we can try to do more research and learn about their stories so that we can do something to change and move the needle. All of us are watching this video right now because we know that the world is not in the best place right now, but I also implore to you that you have a responsibility to make things better. Thank you so much, and please reach out if you have any questions. Thanks.